Hey guys, I thought it would be fun to record a quick video on how I paint the eyes on the axolotl. Um, Focus this up here. So I have a couple of acrylic paints. I use these Vallejo model color paints. They have a ton of colors. They have airbrush versions. They have regular model paint versions. Any of them can be used in an airbrush if you thin down the model color ones, or vice versa. Sometimes the thin airbrush ones are really good for painting and dry brushing as well, but I digress. So I have a cookie CAD printed head I was going to paint the eyes on. I've got a couple of very fine uh, round paint brushes. These are, let's see if I can focus here, a 000 and a quadruple zero. Pretty small tips. Let me take these off so you can see. I also have my favorite little detailed brush, which is, I think, impossible to get now. And it's a Camlon Pro 100 Zero brush. It's tiny, tiny, tiny tip. I try to keep this one in as good a condition as I can because I can't find a way to get a replacement. But anyways, so black and white, pretty basic. These axolotls, like a lot of them in nature, look like they have little, black beady eyes. So I just keep it simple and stylized with that. I'm gonna grab the 000 because it's a little bit bigger to do the black, at least to start. I have this lens lamp, which is super helpful because it's such small stuff. So sometimes I'll look through that and use that as my kind of help my eyes out a little bit. The first thing you definitely want to do is, if you have any wisps of filament on the eyes, you want to clean that off because it'll interfere with the brush movement. I've already kind of done that on this, so it should be good. I want to get this in focus more. There we go. So with the black, I tend to grab kind of a little, I don't know if you can see that, put a little pool of the black on the tip of the brush and start somewhere in the middle of the eye so that I'm not worried about pushing it into the edges right away. And I'll kind of start with a bigger pool in the middle and then slowly kind of push it out towards the edges until I reach the lid. Just because I don't want to go right at the lid directly, because that's easy to miss, honestly. Like, you just go in and mash it in there. So the other thing that's super important, especially if you have shaky hands like I do, is I use my other two fingers as a bracing point. So I'm always bracing my hand against the model at some point, just to give myself a more stable positioning. Even I'll rest my arm on a surface just to get less shaking through to the model, and I just kind of push it out and keep kind of going around that way. Start in the middle and push it out towards the lid, and go slow and kind of just eke it out a little bit. I don't know if you're getting a good view of this. Try and change my angle here. Is this in focus? Okay, closer. So yeah, again, like, there's a pool here in the middle, and I'm just pushing it out towards the edge slowly, carefully, just using the very tip of the brush. And constantly change your angle of your brush so that you're not dragging it across other high areas of the model. And you can push too a little bit, like forward, it's all about finding ways to get fine control over the brush. So if it's holding your fingers on it, getting a good angle, and don't rush it, because if you try and push, rush the wrong angle, you'll mash it into the side, and then you have to figure out how to clean it up out of all these print lines, which is not easy. Alright, these inside corners are always the toughest, but just gonna go slow. There, so that's one done. Hopefully this is easy enough to see. Let me adjust this light a bit. Do this one. Now that I have one wet here, I want to make sure when I'm positioning and doing this one, I'm cognizant of this one so that I don't actually dip my finger into it and then like dab my finger around the model and spread black paint around. Ask me how I know about that one. Yeah, it has happened. And the more you do it, the easier this stuff becomes. But I'm always, see my hands shaking right now. I'm gonna brace myself a bit. Just keep pushing it out. Changing the angle. Starting in the middle, and you can kind of go a little bit crazier when you're in the middle, just because, but then, gonna slow down at the edges. Make sure I'm getting all the like ridge lines filled with the layer lines. And that's the black. So now I'm going to let that dry a little bit. And once that's kind of dried up, then I'm going to go in and add some little white highlights. Oh, and definitely rinse your brush well in between. Just got a little jar of water here. You don't want to like mash the brush into the base of the jar. I just want to kind of like wipe it back and forth until the paint comes off. If you smash it down, you'll start to spread the bristles out, and that'll start to damage the brush really quickly. The other thing you want to try to avoid as much as possible is letting the paint get up into the metal part. This is called the ferrule. So you want to try and keep the paint at the like top 3/4 of the brush. From like here out. Because if it gets in here and dries in there, then your brush bristles will just start to spread out, and they're really hard to clean and get back to a point. So it's really important to keep them clean and keep the paint out of the ferrule. Let me see. It's looking pretty good. So I've already shaken all my paints. Luckily these eyes don't take very much paint. So for the highlights, usually I'd use my super fine brush, but since you guys probably won't have a 100 0, I'm going to use my quadruple zero brush and paint on some highlights. So I always think of these highlights as they're essentially kind of like a reflection of the light source. So if you imagine, even with seeing the light from this lamp on the eyes, you see how it's kind of glowing in sort of sharper points, which gives some directionality to the light. So light's, say the sun is, over my right shoulder here. The sun would be reflecting off of the upper right part of the eye, on both eyes on the same side. So or if it's a room, you know, sometimes it's a reflection of a window or something, you can make them little squares, but just to keep it simple, I'll just do a dot. That's a lot of paint. So put a little bit of paint on the tip of my brush and just try and do a little circle. Again, I'm bracing my hand against the other hand and the model and just slowly dabbing to get a circle there. And then I'm going to try and do the same circle on the same side of the eye on the opposite eyeball. It's a little... See. So another thing to keep in mind, I'm going to make these a little bigger. Is that with a black beady eye like this, putting one highlight on it makes it look like the eyes are now looking in that direction. But we don't want it to feel like it's looking in the upper right corner. We want it to feel like it's looking forward, and the dots are just highlights. So then I make a counter highlight as if there's another light source in a different spot. So this is how I typically do it. I get a little dot, and I'll pick a spot across what would be the pupil, and do a smaller dot right there. On both eyes. Nice thing on these black eyeballs is if you kind of mess up and make it too big or in the wrong spot, it's super easy to go back over with a little black and just kind of take another stab at it. Like, for example, this spot, this dot here, to me is a little too wide. It looks like an oval. So I'm going to grab a little bit of black and just correct that, like so. And that's sort of the extent of coloring on this. There's one other thing I'm going to do, and that is to use some gloss varnish to do two things. It will protect the paint on the eyes because, you know, raw painted surfaces are a little more vulnerable to scuffing or chipping, things like that. So once the white is dry, I'll go back over with this gloss varnish and it'll protect it, but it'll also give it a nice wet looking shine, which I think is kind of nice on eyeballs. They have all kinds of different versions of these varnishes, different brands, etc. But you know, there's gloss, satin, flat, matte varnishes. I use the gloss on the eyes usually because it'll make it look nice and wet. It may go on kind of cloudy looking, but it usually dries clear, so don't worry about that. If it does create any haziness, you can, like on the white highlights, you can go back and just touch up the white a little bit after the fact. But the nice thing about these varnishes is if you have a PLA that is shinier than you like or not glossy enough, you could take this and put it in an airbrush and spray it over the whole model. And say I wanted to take this sheen off this cookie cat, I could spray this matte varnish and it would you know, matte this down quite a bit, or the opposite, make it look super wet and shiny. So there's the eyes on that guy, nice and glossy. And just to show you some variations, I have this other model that I painted a long time ago. Feels like a long time ago now. But this is a darker filament, so I wanted to try doing lighter eyes. So for him I actually did a blue kind of iris. You know, lizards and amphibians, a lot of times their iris takes up the whole surface of their eyeball, so I just did a whole blue pass and then a black pupil in the middle using the rings of the layer lines as a guide. And then rather than doing the circle highlights, I did kind of little streaks, little angular streaked ones on both sides, and then another, still have the like little counter dot, but it just gives it a different look, maybe a little more realistic, I guess, look, you know, but just goes to show you can kind of play with how you shape those highlights to get different effects. And that's that. I might do another video on painting the bearded dragon, but I guess I'll give a quick rundown of how I do the eyes on this. I guess for the black, since it's inside there, I'll like glob a fairly big chunk of black on my paintbrush, and it's sort of like, you know, the game of Operation. I just brace myself, put the brush inside there, and just spread it around as much as I can from different angles to try and get it to cover in there. And when that's done, I'll go over the whole eye with not white, like this white of the eye here isn't actually white, it's a light gray. This is an airbrush paint, so it's pretty thin, but it works great. You, depending on the color of your base, you may need to do, you know, your plastic, you may need to do a base layer of white just to get it solid or whatever. And then you could go over it again with a light gray to get the sclera. And the reason I do the light gray instead of the white is that when I paint the highlight here with the pure white, I want it to pop out from the rest of the eye and look brighter than bright. So making the eye white gray helps this eye white stand out. And then the iris, I just did an ochre or a yellow, off yellow color. So I would do the black first, go over the whole thing with this white, including this gray rather, including the iris, and then go on top of that iris with a yellow or whatever color you want to make the iris, and then last go in and do the highlight dot. And that just brings a lot of pop to that eye. I'm realizing now I didn't put any varnish on this eye, so it's not shiny, but it kind of looks nice matte too, you know. So pick your pleasure, and that's pretty much that. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you later.